Hey there, and welcome back to Brass Tacks, our video series for addressing our toughest questions for taking ideas and putting them into action. I'm Nicola, founder of Up With Community, a practice for connecting into our personal power for change. Today, I am thinking about survival and how we are going to survive as people in community, no matter what happens in the election coming up next month. And as I held this question, one of the first people I wanted to talk to was Trish Tchume. Trish is the Sterling Network Coordinator at the Robert Sterling Clark Foundation. And she is someone who I have had a chance to walk with over the last few years and learn about community and power. So, hey, Trish, thanks for being here.
Nico?
Trish, before we dive in on this question, I would just love to hear a little bit more about what you're up to in the world.
Yeah. Well, one, is just such a gift to be able to spend some time with you. This is the most important thing, right? During this time. So thanks for making space for us to be together. What am I doing in the world? Well, I can tell you what I am in the world. I'm a first generation Ghanaian American. I am a Brooklynite by way of Philadelphia.
And you really are.
I really am, through and through. And that's where I sit today. I'm a sister and an auntie, a very proud auntie, by blood and by choice to many, many folks. In terms of the role that I try to hold in movement spaces, I'm somebody who is focused on leadership cultivation, especially of women of color. I'm a network weaver, which is the role that I hold currently at the Robert Sterling Clark Foundation. I'm a racial justice advocate, a storyteller, and just someone who deeply believes in our power to take care of ourselves. So, sorry, it's my alarm.
No worries.
Someone who believes deeply in our power to take care of ourselves. So I'm so excited to be in this conversation today.
Me too. Me too. Well, Trish, we've both been working in different movement spaces over the course of this year. And there have been ups and downs. There have been these crescendo moments of waves cresting and receding and cresting and receding. And, you know, I feel the pressure cooker of the next 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 weeks. Mm-hmm. And so this question of, I am determined to survive. How can we be determined to survive? Has been on my mind. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to just hear what insights or reflections do you have about that in this moment?
Yeah. Well, so one of the things that I, as I was thinking about this question that I wanted to start with is just a grounding in the fact that this election is important. I think there are, I'm in some movement spaces where folks are really disillusioned about electoral politics. And so the reaction around that is to say, like, it doesn't matter if it's a Democrat or if it's a Republican in office, like, you know. And so I know that there are people who their lived experiences tell them something different. I know that there are immigrants who have suffered more deeply over the past 4 years than in the previous 8. I know that there are refugees and migrants, especially, who have suffered more deeply. I know that there are women who have lost access to reproductive choice, right? I know that there are poor people who have lost access to services. I know that there are young people who have just lost track of the possibility of being able to form a career for themselves where they're actually going to be able to make a living wage, right? So as far as I can see, and as far as the people that I care about have experienced, there is a material difference between a Donald Trump win and a Joe Biden win in the next several weeks. And so I want to first start by affirming that. Um, and so, as from where I sit, I'm going to try as hard as possible and encourage other people to end this administration, right? So that we have the conditions to push for what I'm about to talk about, which is all the things that that we can do to create the world that we know we need in order to thrive. And so so I would agree with you that there's been this ebb and flow, especially over the past year, as we've experienced COVID and these and the racial uprisings around just thinking about survival. And so the person I want to point to is Angela Davis. And we know Angela Davis. She's a revolutionary. She's been doing this for a long time. So I'm going to listen to Angela Davis. And I loved her book, Freedom is a Constant Struggle. Would we recommend it to people if you're wanting a long view of revolutionary history? And she talked about the Obama administration and the failure of the Obama administration, not the failure of the administration, but our failure as folks in movement. And she's very clear about the fact that that we missed an opportunity. We took our feet off the gas, right? The movement that swept him into office was the movement that should have continued to radicalize his politics and the politics of other folks in positions, in governing positions, right? In order to get closer to what we really need in order to be able to thrive as individuals, especially marginalized folks in this community or in this country. And so, you know, I think that that we've learned that lesson. I just can't imagine, especially as folks in movement, I can't imagine another circumstance in which we would pin all of our hopes on any elected official, right? And so, so I mean, it was a sad, hard lesson to learn how quickly all the things that we built could be dismantled in less than 4 years. But a lesson that I think it's gone deep, and so we know now that that the things that we need are things that we have to build, and the things that we have to push into the structures and institutions that organize our lives. And so, so I see that happening. I see it happening everywhere. And I really want to shout out the movement for Black Lives, especially folks like BYP 100, with programs like the Night Out for Safety and Liberation, where they didn't just talk about what community care means, but they like picked a day and helped us all see wherever we lived, like, here's what you have access to. You have access to mediation, you have access to community gardens, you have access to mutual aid systems. So they really brought us into active imagination around that. And it has served us well. That active imagination, I think, has served us well over this past year when we had no choice but to take care of each other, because our healthcare systems, our public safety systems, not only failed us, but turned against us. And so you saw people leaning into mutual aid. You saw people checking up on their neighbors. You saw people forming these pods to take care of each other's children, to educate each other's children. And it is just that practice of turning to each other first, right? And then figuring out how to move those systems that we've developed for ourselves into something that gets supported by our institutions, right? By our governing institutions, that I think is going to just ensure that we're going to be okay no matter what. So so yeah, that's something I would point to.
I got goosebumps when you said active imagination.
Oh yeah.
Because there's so much in there, you know, it's active and it's imagination, right? Because it's not imagination to dissociate and then disconnect and then isolate. It's to imagine to then be more present. And I've noticed that I've done that in two ways, and I haven't thought about them as active imagination. But one thing that I've done earlier this year is I started just describing this, what I call multiverse, like a multiracial universe that has an alternate history to ours, but like not an alternate like history, like hard facts, but like spiritual history, like kind of folk history. And as I would go there to spend time, I found myself feeling less afraid, less anxious in the rest of my actions, because there was a place for that energy to move.
That's right.
Rather than sink me down. And in the last few weeks, I realized I've been using my active imagination to allow myself to yell at some of my neighbors who have their little Trump signs out. And, you know, and, you know, like all the things, so that then when I see them, I can do something that's not, but that's also not, you know, it's like I've just been letting myself, and I think my family's been a little bit like, what's she doing over there? But I'm just like letting myself run through those different scenarios in my mind again, so that the energy can move out of my body and not stay in my neck and not stay in my hips. You know, because I find if I don't use active imagination, my body just starts to collapse in on itself. Right.
That's 100% right. And I mean, you did it through writing, right? Most of us, I mean, we have to experience the world that we want to see. We have to prefigure it, right? And you know, I remember like being fascinated by cults when I was growing up.
That's another video. Yeah.
Real talk. We can come back to that. But what I loved about it, it was like they bet on everything, right? Like they went and they went all in on the world that they wanted to see, right? They went and they lived it. They created it and they lived it. And none of us has to join a cult. That's the message that I want us to leave this with. But the active part of this is that we have to do something that can counter the power of the current culture that we live in, which really does a great job of stripping us of hope, right? And so what is as powerful as that for you was writing about like really creating this like very strong visual of a world that serves you better, serves your family better, right? And we have to do versions of that, right? So for you know, for some of us, it's you know, it's these mutual aid relationships. Like, you know, I want to experience what it feels like to be in a place where neighbors take care of each other. So many people talked about that. I'm talking to my neighbors again. You know, we're at a distance, but we're checking in on each other. You know, for me, I've noticed that all of the things that I'm doing outside of work, the thread of like how I'm volunteering is, oh, these are all activities that prefigure, right? They are building the alternatives that I want to be living into. You know, there's a Black-led food cooperative that's addressing the racial apartheid, the food apartheid that's happening in central Brooklyn here, right? And so I joined that effort because that's what I want. I want everyone to have access to free and healthy food. And I get to do that right now. You know, I get to do it in this one neighborhood, and one day I'll live in a world where everyone has access to that. You know, I did a doula training this year because I want to live in a world where everyone, but especially Black women who have these disproportionate rates of maternal mortality, feel affirmed and respected and celebrated in their birthing experience, right? Which is something that happens like no matter who's in office, right? Like people are going to continue to give birth. So I wanted to have the experience of right now creating spaces where birthing parents feel affirmed in that experience, right? And so I think it's so important not only to I was just on a walk this morning where my friend of mine was talking about how Miriam Kaba talks about hope as a practice. We have to be in the practice of hope. And that is the thing I want to call up, that it's not for us to say like, we gotta hope, you know, we have to actually put ourselves physically in these situations where we actively get to experience the thing that's worth hoping for.
I think that's exactly right. I think that's exactly right. It's an embodied hope, right? It's not just like and one of the questions that I walked in with was, how do we plan for the unknown? And I think it's like I'm almost hearing the answer already, which is, I don't need to plan for the unknown. I need to live in my hope. I need to practice my hope. And that is what's resonating with me so powerfully here. And, one of the first steps for me in doing that was I felt shy, embarrassed, and awkward about trying to share my active imagination with people outside of work.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, I do my active imagination at work. And then I was like, but why don't I tell God Papa Craig about my active imagination? And I had to like go through this thing of like, this isn't something I need to hold just for myself. And that's what I love about the BYP 100 at night out that you talked about, is like these are things that get us out of our silos, that get us out of the oppressive isolation that our system thrives on.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right.
And just meeting my own shame and embarrassment about those things, so that I can feel that joy in relationship and in community with others.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think some things I would add, because I think you're absolutely right. The practice, especially the practicing community of hope, is so important. I think there's also sort of, I would say two things. One is sort of like, what are the things that will be fixed, right? Or that can be fixed no matter what happens, right? And some of them are like the things that we value, like our community, like our bodies, our imagination. But I've been really looking at tools also that help us, especially to think about like, well, what is my role in this moment, right? Like, I don't know what's going to happen, but like, here's how I can show up. A lot of folks have shared Deepa Iyer's social change roles map, and it's such a beautiful tool that you can, I think probably when she envisioned it, it was like, every year you should check in on this thing. And I know people that are like, every time I go into a meeting, I got to look like, all right, am I going to show up as a healer? Am I going to show up as a, but I think it's practices like that where it's like, all these things are happening, but like at the very least, like I can show up like this. So one is sort of like being able to ground in these roles. And then the other tool that I would point to is, I mentioned my attraction recently to Angela Davis, and for me, it's because this moment feels so singular and dramatic and deep. And it is. And there are so many moments over the course of history that have been dramatic and have felt urgent and deep. And it is impossible for me, where I sit, to be able to have that long view. I have to go to someone like Angela. I have to look to someone like Angela to elders to really pull me back out, and to be frank, to young people too, to remember like, oh, there's something that's going to happen after me, right? It sort of like right sizes the feeling of this moment. And a tool that helps to do that, aside from spending time in intergenerational spaces, is looking at tools like, I don't know if you've seen the movement life cycle, but the social movement life cycle by Movement Net Lab. But it's this way of looking at these experiences that we have of trigger moments, and how folks show up in uprising and the peak of those uprisings, and then what happens after those uprisings. And what it really does is it shows you that even though this moment feels so singular, there are some patterns that we can look to. And it's not the same thing as knowing what's going to happen. It's not the same thing as being able to plan for what's going to happen, but it does give you some information around like, well, historically, like this is kind of how these things have gone. So how do you need to show up? What do we need to be building at these different moments? And those have been really helpful for me, just to think about like, there are some things that we can use to make sense of this. And one of the things that I can rely on is how I'm going to show up in these different situations, in these different moments. So
yeah. I love that. I wrote down some of these pieces because we'll put it in the link. We'll link to it in the notes. I'm an auntie too. I can't know how to talk about the YouTube properly. Just like, I'm like, is it links? Is it show notes? Is it something? I don't know. It'll be down here.
right.
It'll be down here. I do identify as an auntie. I love that. And as you were talking, I was like, I feel like I'm still an auntie in my little shell on the tree. And I haven't quite hatched yet. And I need to still look for my elders. Like I'm still looking, I'm still kind of in that process.
We'll always need them. And they're waiting for us too. Every time I reach out to someone who's further up the road, like they'll tell you forever. They'll sit and talk forever. And it's like such medicine. Like, oh, okay.
Really?
Okay.
Really? This makes me want to call an auntie this afternoon. Trish, thank you so much.
Nico, thank you.
I really appreciate this.
This is so great. Thank you I'm going to shout you out for a second. Like you're somebody, you're already an auntie. You're like a baby auntie, like you have always been in the role of like calling us to peace, right? Like, what do you need to be well in this moment, right? And like, you do it through your coaching, you do it through the questions that you ask, the frameworks you create, these conversations. And so like, I'm expressing collective gratitude. There's like a couple people behind me that are shouting you out too. And so thank you for allowing me to represent those people today who are so grateful to you for holding these kinds of spaces for us. It really is a big thing. So appreciate you.
Thank you, Trish. I'm calling in my friends Jyoti and Shreya, who taught me how to learn how to take a compliment. And I'm calling in my 7-year-old self, where people were like, why are you acting like our mom? It is my spirit.
We honor all
Thank you, Trish. Thank you, Trish. Big hug. And yeah, more soon. Thank you.